to season 2, episode 3 of How Did I Get Here? Uh, as I may have forewarned you, this season the episodes are coming out slower. I'm sorry. I know some of you were really excited about seeing these every Wednesday, but you're just going to have to learn patience. Um, yeah, this episode, I really, really enjoyed this episode. Uh, I kind of think it might be the best one I've done yet. Uh, and that has nothing to do with me. It has everything to do with my guest, Maggie Arthur, of an organization called Our Music, My Body, uh, an organization that's essentially out there for reducing harm and threats of sexual violence uh, in the live music world. She helped create a harm reduction policy for Riot Fest. They've tabled a bunch of shows and festivals and whatnot, uh, and they do really good work. This also happens to be Sexual Assault Awareness Month, for those who weren't aware of that. So I didn't know that, actually. Maggie told me that when I chatted with her and said, yeah, this is probably going to go up in early April. And she said, oh, that it's Sexual Assault Awareness Month. So this is our special Sexual Assault Awareness Month episode. Um, but yeah, there's so much good content. She talks about why she got involved in this, uh, gave some tips on how to actually make things better and safer for when venues and festivals are able to get going again. Uh, I hope you enjoy it. Here she is, Maggie Arthur. Hi, Maggie. So before I ask you the first question, tell me exactly what is it? What is your role at our body, our music?
Our music, my body.
Our music, my body. I'm terrible.
No worries. It's word soup. My role at Our Music, My Body is I'm the campaign coordinator, but I'm really the resident Jill of all trades. I kind of, especially in the last year, handle all the things about the campaign. Previously, I had a co-coordinator with me, working with me, who focused more on managing the volunteers, but they have since left. And at the same time, we went into COVID lockdown. So volunteering wasn't really as much of our focus anymore. So that's where we sit now. I guess I should probably, with that, give some background of what OMB is and the structure of it. So Our Music, My Body is a campaign originally created by two anti-violence agencies in Chicago. One is called Resilience. That's where I work. We provide support to sexual assault survivors in the form of absolutely free group and individual therapies, medical and legal advocacy, and sort of counsel in that regard, and then prevention education. And that's what I do. So I like to say my day job is talking to young people about consent and healthy relationships and bodily autonomy. And my night gig is talking to adults about those things via OMB. So the other arm of the campaign originally was a domestic violence agency in Chicago called Between Friends. In the last year, as I said, my campaign co-coordinator left Between Friends, and so now the campaign has really been absorbed by Resilience and by me. So that's where we currently sit. And our work on the campaign focuses in we have sort of a two-pronged approach, if you will. So on one hand, we're really public facing. We table at shows and festivals. We provide resources to folks. We just talk to people. We're a space where people can kind of vent or share their experiences if they want to. And then on the more sort of behind the scenes end, we do a lot of work with venues and festivals around creating policies to prevent harm and harassment, but also to training staff to actually be able to follow those policies, because, you know, we found our work is only as effective as staff's ability to carry it out. And so that's a lot of what I historically have done, is doing more of those trainings and workshops and things like that.
Excellent. So now I'm gonna jump back to the question that I start every one of these with. What was the musical event that made you decide that you want to pursue some avenue of music? Specifically for you, like making shows a safer place for people. Like, what was the event that like triggered that being your passion?
Oh wow, so I grew up in a super small town in Indiana. Thankfully, it was like pretty close proximity to Indianapolis, and so my early music scene was in Indianapolis in the early 2000s. And to be totally honest, it was it was just full of white, straight, hetero bros. Like, it was like very broy hardcore music. So I wasn't even necessarily super excited about the shows, but it was like I would go with my friends because that's, you know, what we did. And, you know, that was adjacent enough to the stuff I did like, which was more punk music. So that's where I spent a lot of my time. And early on, I realized that scene was just not for me. As a queer woman in those spaces, even though I'm able bodied, even though I'm white, I immediately was like, they don't want me here. I'm not welcome here. I got pushed out of circle pits. I got like really aggressively manhandled when I was trying to like just be in the front of a crowd at shows. I watched friends of mine who were also women like get their bodies grabbed in gross non-consensual ways while trying to mosh and stuff like that. And like also too, there was this undercurrent of like slut shamey gossip that would happen too at shows, and sort of pitting the women against each other, which always really bummed me out because there were only, I don't know, 10 of us there to begin with. So I really felt like we should have a little more solidarity with each other. And so I, at the time anyway, had no idea of like what an alternative could be. You know what I mean? Like, I just kind of figured I gotta make my way in this space. And thankfully I had, you know, close women friends who would go to shows with me, and that was sort of our MO, was like we were going to be loud, we were going to take up space, and we didn't care if we got into people's way, you know. But it still felt super isolating, you know, like we had to like do that extra work rather than just showing up and having fun with our friends. And so when I moved to Bloomington, Indiana for college, which is the site of like Planet X Records, and like a lot of folk punk came out of that space, as well as other amazing musicians. I just saw a huge shift in the sort of overall attitude and behavior at shows. Like, not only were there more, diverse crowds, there was also more diverse bands playing. Like, I didn't have to just listen to the same 3 songs over and over again. And like, there were more people who were willing to, you know, take up space in the way that we felt like we really had to carve that out in Indianapolis. And so that's when I started to kind of open up my eyes of like, okay, there are alternatives here. You know, like there can be a music space or scene that is like inclusive and accessible and fun, and not really gross and grimy and exclusive. And then moving to, and all the while, pretty much like a year or two after I moved to Bloomington and was in college and undergrad, I started volunteering at a domestic violence shelter. And so I kind of like at that point tuned into working with survivors and their specific needs. And so it wasn't until I was in Chicago, I was actually interning at Resilience, that I learned about OMB. It had just started. And it was kind of this like mind explosion moment of like melding all of these interests and passions that I had. And so I don't know that I could say that there was any like one like pivotal musical experience so much as it was just accumulation of, you know, that feeling of like, I fully acknowledged that I had to sort of like wear an armor when I went into these spaces. Just being the person that I was, having the body that I did. And, you know, Ohm and B kind of like showed me that I didn't have to, or that I could at least put that energy into maybe like a better, you know, better space, better use.
One of the people that began OMMB, man, it's hard to say that fast. uh, when you joined them, what was the structure like? Like, was there already a curriculum in place? Uh, what was the beginning goal essentially?
So it was brand new when I joined as a volunteer at first, and then was brought in as staff a little bit later. And so the initial goal, or I guess the initial inspiration, was just that these two prevention educators, one from Resilience, one from Between Friends, who had this knowledge of, you know, big picture thinking and harm prevention, were also just super active in the local music scene, and we're seeing that, you know, the same issues I was just talking about were coming up there too. Even though it was more expansive and inclusive in Chicago for sure, there were still artists who were using their power to take advantage of fans, and there were still people who were not facing any accountability for the harm that they were causing to the scene. There was still hardly any women in bands. There were hardly any non-white people in bands. You know, like, even though this scene felt so much better, maybe to me, it was still like not without its problems. But so they were seeing that while they're teaching in schools, and they just kind of came together and realized like it wouldn't be so hard to kind of apply these same mindsets, these same prevention ideals and basics to this particular community. And so they started out by sort of asking themselves like, okay, what exists already? Like, you know, what work is already being done? Maybe we just haven't seen it. Maybe we're overlooking it. So they did some research, and the thing that stuck out to them was that, especially for music festivals, they have to have thorough policies on how to prevent all sorts of harm. So they have to have policies available for active shooters, for weather emergencies, for, you know, any number of things that could happen in an outdoor event, right? They have to have that outlined, and it's available to anyone who's coming to the fest. They have to make accommodations for folks as they need them, to make sure the fest is accessible. But there was nothing in the books about what to do when someone experiences sexual violence. And by sexual violence, I mean like groping, harassment, catcalling, you know, non-consensual, and non-consensual anything really. So there was no coverage on that. There was no talk of that for any of these major festivals who were coming through Chicago. So they started essentially cold calling them and saying, you know, hey, we know that this is a problem that's happening in these spaces, and we have this expertise, this knowledge. We want to help. We want to bring this knowledge to you and make this better. So let's work together. And the immediate reaction from across the board was like, that's a really noble effort, but we definitely don't have that problem at our fest. So best of luck. And so just before I joined in, they did this anonymous, really informal online survey asking anyone who wanted to participate. They ended up getting just over 500 responses. You know, have you ever experienced harassment at a venue or festival? Tell us what happened. You know, check all that apply kind of thing. And they were able to get some really solid research and numbers on just how prevalent this problem was, brought those back to the original fest and venues they'd reached out to, and then suddenly they had a lot more time for us, and were much more interested in what we were trying to sell, you know.
It's funny
And
how that
so,
works.
yeah, exactly. And so the original plan, honestly, was targeting those fests because we kind of had their ear, and saying like, let us just table and pass out resources and make information available to your fans. And that's one step we can take towards making your event safer. And then when that, proved to be successful, and in fact, Riot Fest said, we'll do you one better. We want you to write an anti-harassment policy for us. Then we kind of started to get some traction, and more fests and then Chicago venues started signing on for the same things. And that's about around the time that I had joined as a volunteer. And then about a year later, I actually got hired on the prevention team and then took over our arm of the campaign as a result.
Yeah. So when you were tabling at these festivals, did you ever get any pushback from audience members over just being there?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I it's not often. I'm going to be super clear. It's not often. Like, the majority of the reaction from folks is super, super positive. And they're really excited that we're there. They're thankful that we're there. And, honestly, a lot of the time, folks just want to share their experiences of harassment and harm, maybe at previous years, maybe 20 years ago, that they just never had an outlet for that before. So that's the majority of their songs. But yeah, we absolutely get like in real life trolls who just want to minimize and deny that this is an issue. They like are really confused, or they just want to talk about like, I don't know. They just want to talk about things like, well, if women didn't get so drunk at shows, like this wouldn't happen to them. Like they just want to kind of perpetuate like myths and really grimy stereotypes that we hear all the time. If not just outright saying like this isn't real. So I'd say that's like not super often, but it definitely does happen. And I have got to just plug, our volunteers are so incredible. Our volunteer pool is small but mighty, and like I've never had a volunteer who didn't feel super comfortable just like shutting that down and just like coming right back, if not serving it back just as at the same level as this person to shut them down. And I'm really like, I feel really lucky in that our volunteers are like really amazing in their own right.
Yeah, I'll be honest, that sounds incredibly scary to me. Like having to confront an actual troll in real life at all.
Yeah, I mean, I would say my go-to reaction when I've had to deal with that, and I've seen some of our volunteers employ this too, is to do that tried and true trick of just asking someone to explain themselves. So like, say they make a really sexist joke or something, and then just responding with a straight face and saying like, I don't really understand. Like, I don't think I get the joke. Like, can you explain it to me? Or, oh yeah, you think that like if women just like wore more clothes and didn't drink, they wouldn't get hurt. Like, can you talk me through that? Can you like play the tape to the end here so I can just understand where you're coming from? And I think the thing is that we've all learned is that most of the time trolls just like want that reaction. Like they're just looking for someone to like fire back at them. And so if you meet them with kind of like indifference and curiosity, they're actually really quick to back down, or at the very least, like, it doesn't go very far. You know what I mean? So that's a hot tip for me. Just come back with like, ask lots of questions, can you explain that a little more to me? I don't think I understand.
Yeah, it's like you don't want to feed the troll. You want to make the troll justify their existence.
Yep, exactly. You're right there. You got it.
Yeah. So you work with Riot Fest. Uh, Riot Fest being the only music festival thus far that Bikini Kill has played when they reunited. So I'm guessing that means you're doing pretty well with them. Um, at least I wouldn't suspect Bikini Kill would join on to a festival that feels unsafe. Um, what was that process like developing uh, a a plan for a festival? Like,
Yeah. I mean, talk about a dream. I like being at a not just being at a fest where Bikini Kill is, but like being having a tent there, like having a presence there. Like I feel like I had those a moment of like if 16-year-old Maggie could see me now. Just like in daydreaming that like Kathleen Hanna's gonna just casually walk by our table. That didn't happen, by the way, but
oh,
a girl can dream. um I'm sorry, I got so daydreamy. I kind of can you rephrase the question?
what was your process like for coming up with the plan, the structure for like setting up policy and procedure from the ground up for a festival, especially something as big as Riot Fest. I mean, Riot Fest is I think what like five, six stages. Like it's it's it, it's a significant amount of space and a significant amount of kind of broy bands in addition to like I mean it runs the whole gamut of punk and heavy, which means you run the whole gamut of personality types in punk and heavy. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, like yeah, just I mean I know you don't have to go into every minute detail, but like what was the thinking like taking what you've already done and turning it into processes for a festival like that?
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for snapping back into reality. um,
And please answer entirely in Latigra lyrics. No.
if only. So the thing, I guess, a lot of big fests and really any like corporation, kind of their first like baby step is to just acknowledge that harm is happening in their space, and in doing so, like putting out a public policy that acknowledges that that's a risk. Because so often, and we see this reflected in colleges, we see this reflected in major corporations, we see this everywhere. They want to report like we've had zero incidents of harm ever, like we're so safe. And to the more sort of I don't know, trained eye, like to an advocate, that doesn't we never register that as wow, this is the safest place on earth. Rather, we register that as wow, no one feels comfortable coming forward with their experiences. No one is, or if they do, no one's tracking it, no one's keeping any sort of data on how harm is happening and what happens afterwards. In fact, like we hear those statements and red flags go off for us because that just means that all of these incidences are being swept under the rug. And when we're looking at music festivals, their whole aim is to create this utopia within a city, right? A sort of separate, but within the city, they want to create this tiny city where everything you could ever want is there. Your favorite bands are there. Your favorite food is there. There's like cool activities and things you can buy. And so it would be really ridiculous for us to think you're going to create this microcosm that's a replica of a normal city, right? And expect that the harm that happens in a normal city isn't going to happen there. Like that just doesn't make sense. Also, if you really thought that, why would you hire hundreds of security guards to be around, right? Like it doesn't add up. So, the first, like I said, the first baby step for a lot of these places is just acknowledging that harm happens there, and then putting out, even if it's just kind of a vague general policy. And I think Riot Fest is a good example of this. Their policy is like pretty basic, pretty bare bones, but I don't mean that in like a negative way. It's just saying, like harassment will not be tolerated here, and this is what we consider harassment. The end. And so that's always a good start. And then after that, we start to push them for like, okay, so what does accountability look like then? What does restoring this community, quote unquote, this weekend community look like after harm has happened then? What does the follow up look like? And can you incorporate that into your policy or into the way that you're training your staff so that we can ensure that not only are you telling your fans, hey, we take this seriously, but also we're going to make sure that we're actually doing work to prevent it and not just we acknowledge it, the end. So it's kind of like it's a long game, honestly. You know what I mean? Like, we initially set up the relationship, we help work out what's going to be the policy that goes on the website that fans can see and that attendees can see. And then we kind of, as time goes on, we push them a little harder to set up those next steps. We push them a little harder to train staff, or at the very least, like the sort of management staff, those who are going to be potentially carrying out those next steps, things like that. So it's a it's like a calculated long game that really the idea at the end of whatever we do, whatever we design, the idea being that at the end, the person who has experienced harm is going to be able to come back and feel like they still can be safe there. They can still have fun there. They can still be welcome there, right? And also, too, we don't want to, like, we, OMB, also want to acknowledge that, like, this stuff is complicated. And the immediate, easy response would just be to have, like, a zero tolerance, you're kicked out policy. But how does that work when it's your headlining band who gets called out? How does that work when the person who experienced harm actually is dating that person and they don't want them to be kicked out? There are all these sort of factors. And so that's part of why I think OMB is such an amazing partner to these groups. And I love that we get to sort of work alongside them. Like, we get to live firmly within the realm of survivor advocacy, but work alongside venues and festivals, because we can say, above all else, we have the survivors' wants and needs in mind. We know y'all have a whole lot of other stuff you need to worry about, but we can just focus here and we can get us here. We can ensure that the survivor is going to, like I said, be able to come back tomorrow and still have a good time if they so choose. And that we're not going to potentially put them in greater harm by just stomping through and trying to, like, kick everybody out. You know what I mean?
When you get that many people in a space, somebody's going to treat somebody poorly in general. But yeah, and yeah, no, it does make a lot of sense. How do you handle it when somebody pushes back on being called out then and there at an event?
Yeah. So, I'll be totally honest. I've not encountered yet, anyway, a situation where someone's come up to us and said, yo, that person just did this to me and I want you to make sure they get kicked out, or I want you to say something to them. Usually what ends up happening, especially because in a large crowd, you don't always see the person who like gropes you as they're walking by you in a crowd, right? Or, you try to describe them and it's like, I don't know, a white person in a blue t-shirt. Like, it's just like, okay, what do we do with this? So that's also why our focus is so heavily rooted in supporting the person who experienced harm versus, like, enacting repercussions or accountability necessarily in the moment, because we know it's just, like, it's rarely that easy. But with that, like, no one wants to face consequences for their actions. Like, no one enjoys being called out in that way, right? And so it's tough. And that's also why it's so important for a venue or a fest or wherever this is happening to have not just their internal set of guidelines, but also that staff understands it so that, there's multiple points of entry here. So it's not just all on one person to handle the situation, but rather there you can like have a team of people helping you out. Um, and and honestly, the other thing too is like the majority of the time when we get complaints where it's like this happened to me today, um that person just like wants to be able to talk about it. They just want to be able to vent. They just want to, maybe sit down and like gather themselves a little bit in a place that feels safe for them. In some festivals, they've been accommodating enough. We've been lucky enough to where we have sort of our table where we pass out resources. We also I should have mentioned, we make buttons for free with people as a entry point, just to like get people talking. So we have like that piece, and then we'll also have like what we call like a chill space, where it's like we have some coloring books, we have some like, maybe like a blanket down on the grass, and people can just like chill out, hang out. And so the majority of the time folks are really looking for more of that. They're looking more just for like some in the moment sort of like while they're going through active crisis, like a place to come back down. Um, and so that's kind of the majority of the experiences I've had personally.
Yeah, man, coloring books is a brilliant idea. Like, what better way to kind of just come down from any difficult situation? I never would have considered that. Um,
Yeah.
so towards the beginning of the pandemic, like the music industry kind of had like a big second hit with the Burger Records situation. I'm curious, like, did that it was a lot of bands, like just the reality of how a lot of bands were treating their fans was coming out and becoming like becoming known, even though I think some of it was like stuff that people like thought how like a lot of things that people had a hunch about, especially with the Burger Records community, was like a reality. Um, ha, man, you ever had those situations where like you have a question at the tip of your brain and it's not quite formed?
Talk
Uh,
talk it out. I'm here for it.
uh, I guess what like you said before that like you can't necessarily like immediately cancel a headliner if you find out something's happening. Like, what is the right way out? Like, what like should a promoter do if they realize that this is happening under their house, if you will, or like what is the first step when like you think something's going on, nobody's actually like come out and said anything, but like you want to. How do you make people safe if you're not sure that something is happening or not?
Hmm. Yeah, and I want to preface my answer with like I am not a promoter. I don't book. I've never booked bands, so I want to like stay firmly in my lane. But what has been shared with me from our friends and partners who we work with in venues is that there is some pretty lock solid contracts that bands and promoters or bookers are locked into, where essentially they can't, once a band is booked and the contracts are signed, like they can't cancel unless there's like, I don't know, an act of Congress or an emergency or something, right? And so unfortunately that kind of puts these venues in, you know, in a rock and a hard spot where, as you were saying, if their ultimate, you know, or their number one priority is to make sure that their fans and the guests in their space are safe, and they know that they're inviting people in who are unsafe, they can't legally do a lot about the show itself. Um, and that really sucks. I wish that that could change. I wish there could be some flexibility around that. And you know, I don't. Again, I'm not what super well versed in sort of the legal end of all of that. But what I what I think is a, you know, alternative we've seen a lot is that then the fans, the again the guests in the space, have the autonomy to withdraw their fandom, right? They have all the power in that situation to say, I'm not coming to the show, or I'm not supporting this band anymore. And to, you know, they don't owe anyone their support. And they can, you know, try to get return their tickets. They can try to boycott the show, and essentially they can maybe get the show canceled. But even if that doesn't happen, I think it's still absolutely worthwhile for fans to exercise that autonomy and say, like, I don't owe you my support. And I want you to know that I don't appreciate this. Right. So that it's a really sticky situation. You know what I mean? And especially, as you were saying, if they don't, if nothing's come out publicly, but maybe there's like some gossiping or something through the grapevine that's giving this promoter some pause. The other thing that makes this tricky is that if that's the case, maybe even they've had a friend tell them in confidence, look, like the, you know, person in this band did XYZ. It's really not their place to sort of enforce repercussions or accountability without the consent of the harmed person or people. So one thing that's important to keep in mind whenever you're thinking about like what are next steps, what are the moves I can make, is that both sexual violence and intimate partner violence, so those things within sort of the spectrum of gender-based violence and even more, are really rooted in power and control. So it's like it's actions taken to assert power over someone or to take their control of themselves, their bodily autonomy from them. And so by reacting potentially by saying, you know, my best friend shared this with me, so I'm going to take these steps. I'm going to cancel the show. I'm going to do X, Y, or Z without the consent of that person. You're actually taking more power from them. You're taking more control away from them and their ability to, you know, kind of control their narrative and the way they understand what happened to them, the way that they maybe their relationship with that person after that point. And so that's a really harmful thing, a really potentially violent thing that you can do is reacting that way. So all that being said, it's really hard, right, to know exactly how to respond. And my go-to is always just follow the lead of the survivor, follow the lead of the person who has experienced harm. If they're telling you about it, you are in such a fortunate position that they trust you and they're being honest and forthcoming with this, and recognize how privileged you are in that. And then, you know, with that, utilize that trust, utilize that relationship, and ask them, like, what would make you feel better? What would make you feel restored in this moment? And, you know, be honest about what you can deliver. That's the other thing too. Like, never promise, like, yeah, I'm going to ruin their career. I'm going to get them wiped off the face of the earth, because like, you probably don't have that power, right? So but be honest about what you can do. You know, maybe you can share to an extent that feels comfortable, like, so I can't get this show canceled as much as I'd love to, but what I can do is ensure that that band doesn't play my venue ever again. I can do that, you know, or I have the power to while they're playing the show, have a group like Our Music, My Body, Holla Back, Good Night Out, any of these like-minded campaigns, I can have them table there, and I can be really direct as to like why they are there, right? There are all these other sorts of things you can do to just ensure that the harm isn't continuing, because I think that's the other kind of issue we run into is like we see it as like it has to be all or nothing. Like you have to cancel everything, cancel the person, etc., etc. And like it doesn't have to be that black and white. Like we can take steps to ensure that the harm doesn't continue, or that that person knows that they're on thin ice, you know, within the confines of like what we can legally do, what we can do as our, you know, in our role at our job, whatever.
Hi, I'm Michelle Varay. And I'm Kimberly Trung, and we are the host of Crush Fictionally, a podcast all about your favorite fictional characters from movies, TV shows, and more.
Each episode, we pick a theme, curate a list of characters that we love, why we love them, and some fun facts about the people who created them.
So if you've ever felt a true connection with a fictional character,
tune in to Crush Fictionally on Campfire Media,
or wherever you find your podcast.
Yeah, so do you think there's a path to redemption for somebody that has exhibited abusive behavior in the past?
Short answer, yes. I personally, my work, I've been working with survivors in various capacities for about a decade of my life now, and I really value the idea that was carved out by especially Black women in the early anti-rape movement, that a world without violence is possible. I like really, really want that to be true. And so that world is only possible if we acknowledge all that is violence. So that includes state violence, that includes systemic oppression, that includes, ableism and, disability justice and all of these other sorts of layers, right, that inflict harm. So with that, we have to acknowledge that this individual may have caused harm, caused harm on a huge scale even, but they're still a worthy human being who deserves to learn and grow from what they've done. With that, they have to be willing to acknowledge that they caused harm. They have to be willing to, participate in whatever that looks like, whatever accountability or retribution looks like. So, and you can't force someone to do that. So, that makes it a little more complicated. However, I would say, again, the short answer, yes, I absolutely think that there is a future without harm. There is a future where people who do harass or abuse or assault people learn and are restored. And I think that campaigns, not to way overblow the work that OMB is doing, but I do think that campaigns that are rooted in community accountability and bystander intervention, like OMB is, are one of the many pieces towards that future, because our sort of ethos is we help us. And, kind of looking really hard at our reliance on the carceral state, criminal justice system, the legal system, all these things, these systems that contribute to harm. We can really look hard at our reliance on them and how we interact with them. We can keep making moves towards that future.
Yeah. So, do you feel that anybody that's been called out at this point has actually responded in a good and positive way?
Ooh, that's a good question.
Thank you.
I am I'm hesitant to, like, I'm kind of going through a Rolodex in my mind, and then like I'm like, what about that one? Oh no, no. I think that there have been examples of folks taking the right steps, but what has happened over and over is that there's not a whole lot of follow through, and so it makes me, yeah, it makes me hesitant to say that there's like a really good example, because so far I think that, oh, like our whole entire concept of what, you know, being held accountable looks like is still so new in its current application. Again, like, activists have been doing this for decades, but like the way we are doing it now and the way it's shaping up right now is still so new that like I don't even know that we've really had enough time to see like an accountability process, like beginning, middle, and end, like come all the way to fruition, right? But I do think, you know, there are examples that exist of folks taking good steps, and I'm hopeful that there will be more. I'm hopeful that, you know, folks are being more vocal about it too, and that we'll continue to see those good examples, because I know myself, speaking from like a very micro sense, that's what I look for, is more of like, who can I hype because they're doing all the things that their community is asking them to do, versus like who are we sort of like collectively putting our magnifying glass on today. So yeah, I don't know. Do you have, is anyone coming to mind that you can think of that I should look into?
So I feel weird saying that because I'm straight, cis, able-bodied male. So I feel like whenever I think of one, I'm viewing it through the wrong lens. Like I I feel like Aziz Ansari handled it very well, but I think like what Aziz Ansari was called out for wasn't as significant as a lot of things that's coming out. But yeah, like when I talk to my partner about it, she doesn't feel the same way. And in the end, like her perspective makes more, like her perspective does mean more than mine because like she can see things from the victim's lens better than I could. Um, and also just as a historic fan of his work, I kind of wanted him to be good at it. So
Mm-hmm.
I think that that comes into play. Um, and I feel like there's some decent examples of allies out there and folks that have like called out their peers. Although even then, like, I mean, yeah, like historically, I've considered Trent Reznor to be a fairly good ally. But when everything came out about Marilyn Manson, all he kind of said was, "Yeah, the guy's an idiot, and I hate him."
Mm-hmm.
That's not really pushing the conversation forward or really calling out somebody that was, you know, your friend in the past. So, yeah, in the end, I don't feel like I have a good example either. Um, nor am I, yeah. But nor if, although with that, like, I don't even know if I'm a good example as just somebody that's part of this business. Like, not necessarily like I haven't noticed a lot, and that feels bad.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm responding to, or I'm clicking in with two things that you were just saying. One, I I think the Aziz Ansari example is so important, like culturally important, if I can say that, because for so long our perception of what sexual assault looked like was, a creep in the bushes jumping out and snatching you. Our perception was, maybe someone who puts drugs in your drink in public and like lures you home. So a different version of a creep in the bushes, basically. Our perception was that there is this particular type of monster who will target a particular type of victim, and that's really problematic for a lot of reasons that don't even acknowledge the fact that like over 85% of the time it is someone who you have a relationship with, that you're in close proximity to. So like, not even like, let's put the data aside. The problem with those examples is twofold. Is one, it's saying that anyone who, can be victimized, and not exclusively women, but a lot of the time the focus is on women when we say can be victimized. But anyone who can be victimized has a script that they are to follow, has rules that they have to adhere to. And if they don't, it's their fault. Like, the end. Like, they messed up. We all have this rule book this unstated guidebook that we follow. And if you didn't follow the rules, sorry about ya. So that's one reason why I think the Aziz Ansari example is important, because this person arguably followed the rules. So that's one. The other reason why that monster in the bushes example or idea is so harmful is because it also makes it seem like rapists are monsters and ignores the fact that so often people who cause harm are your friends, are people you go on dates with and you think are pretty cool, are your, coworkers, right? And so I just want to say I appreciate that you are acknowledging, like, I like Aziz Ansari, so I wanted him to do good, because it's important, I think, for us all to acknowledge, like, this can be anyone. Like, this can be our friend. This can be someone who we admire. And, like, how do we sit with that? How do we, what does accountability look like when it is your friend or when it is someone you admire? And it's a lot harder to come up with that than when you are thinking of it as this like very far away creature or whatever, this monster, right? When it's someone who you want to share space with. And like, I think, oh my gosh, I can't remember. I won't share that example because I can't remember the actress's name, and I would feel so terrible if I just was like, so-and-so. But so, okay, so that's one kind of reaction I had to what you were sharing. And the other is that we have to just like break out of this binary of like good and bad, harm doer, victim, because we've all been in both of those positions. And I like to refer to it as like big H, little h when I say harm. Like, big H harm is like, is one thing, and little h harm is another thing. I don't want to put it on a scale because that's not fair. But the point is, like, we've all had to apologize. Like, we've all had to acknowledge, like, oh, I really messed up there, and I'm going to need to, like, restore this relationship. And we've all been in situations where the relationship can't be restored. Like, where the other person's like, no, actually, I'm not interested in this, right? You hurt me in such a way where it's like, it's over. And we've had to accept that too. And so like part of the sort of like long game, the big work around ending sexual violence is acknowledging like we've all been in both of those positions. And so what did we need when we were the harm doer to restore ourselves and our community? And what did we need when we were the one who was harmed to restore ourselves in our community? And so like, that's a good place to start. That's a good, like, kind of like thing to meditate on a little bit. If you're really feeling like out to sea of like, what am I supposed to do? Especially, and I appreciate like you acknowledging like, I'm arguably the one with privilege here. So like, what am I supposed to do here? Like, that's a really good, I think that's a good place to start. And I really love, Anthony Bourdain's kind of take on when the Me Too movement started to really hit the restaurant industry, and folks in super fancy, famous kitchens were coming forward and sharing their experiences, which was that he was like, I acknowledge I've never, to my knowledge, harassed or assaulted anyone, but I'm seeing my dear friends coming forward and sharing their stories that they've never told me. So he was like, immediately he knew he was part of the problem, because he's like, why did they never feel safe telling me? Why did I never notice that something was wrong? It's not enough for me to just say, like, I'm not a jerk. Like, how am I ensuring that the people around me know that I'm a person they can trust and who wants to support them? So, I mean, I think it's fine that we don't have great examples, but I think it's good that we keep looking for them, I guess, in summation, and acknowledging that, like, there's probably not going to be a perfect example, and all of our favorite people are problematic because we've all messed up. Like, that's just,
Yeah.
I mean, I think, like, Roxane Gay's book, Bad Feminist, does a much better way of articulating that than I did just because, like, she also acknowledges, like, I still listen to the music that I know is horribly sexist and racist and misogynist and awful and enjoy it, but I do it from this, like, lens of, like, I know it's bad, but this is bringing me joy. So highly recommend that too.
Yeah. So I just want to take a moment. We're coming into really good material. It is at the hour. Do you have like 5, 10 more minutes to keep going? I want to be respectful of your time.
Yeah, let me turn on a light because it's also getting really dark in here. Yeah, I should have warned you. I can go on about this stuff forever, so
Yeah.
Also cut me off.
I kind of don't want to. I want to zero on something. Part of what Anthony Bourdain said I thought was really interesting. Because you said that he hasn't, to his knowledge, harassed somebody. Which, yeah, it's another. So the Sublime song "Date Rape." Brad Knoll once said about that song was he also cannot say for sure that he's never sexually harassed somebody or pressured somebody into sex because it's because he's grown up with the privilege. Like, people aren't necessarily going to call him out on that, which was effectively the inspiration for the song. Like, what does justice look like in that situation? Yeah, like, I think it's great to hear male role models, or just people in general, like, make that claim. Like, we have to understand that we could be that person if we just don't necessarily know, if we're not, like, looking at ourselves at the right lens. Yeah, not a question there, just kind of, yeah, stuck with me. Like, I appreciate it. Also a bummer that both of these examples are people that have passed away, and have passed away at their own hand, which is really heavy.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. But yeah. So to not to lighten it up at all, or to lighten it up too much, but so we're coming up on a time when venues are gonna start reopening in the next few months. People are going to be able to start gathering again. Uh, what advice do you have to event organizers, club owners, people that, like, have space that people gather in, um, to make it? What can they do now to make things safer when they have the opportunity to bring people into their spaces again?
Hooey. I think I'm excited to share that a few venues have already reached out to me thinking, and one today shared a timeline, like, we don't anticipate being able to have people in our space until, like, the end of the summer, but we want to get ahead on this, which makes me feel really hopeful and excited. And I hope that that's not, like, a one-off. Like, I hope that trend continues. that they're reaching out to me for trainings, that is. And in this sort of, you know, in the time of the pandemic where a lot of people were laid off, where a lot of people were at home, and a lot of people had the opportunity for like the first time to step back and think about their experiences in their workplaces and acknowledge that like some stuff was going on that they just never really processed, or maybe they just didn't know how to manage it or handle it, and now they have nothing but time, and you know, people, the conversation is happening online. And so some organizations have popped up in Chicago that are really looking at the hospitality industry specifically. And I know the United Musicians and Allied Workers, UMA, has been organizing in this time for musicians in a similar way. And so I'm really excited. I know I bring all that up to say, I know it will look different when places start to reopen one way or another. Either because these venues are taking initiative on their own, or because the staff is now entering in a position where they are more educated on their rights. They are more, empowered to advocate for themselves because they have been, because they know they have a community around that. And where folks are really going to hold spaces accountable. They're not going to let that stuff slide anymore. So I think change is inevitable. Change is coming one way or the other. I am happy to help it not be such a rough transition if I can. But so I guess like my advice to anyone who's looking to open up their space and do so in a way where they're kind of combating some of those age-old practices that are inherently harmful is, talk to their staff. I think there's a huge, no matter where you work, there's always going to be a huge disconnect between management and staff on the ground, and the staff's sort of interpretation or like experience of decisions that are made on their behalf. Like, you can come from the very baseline perspective of like, your intention is not as important as your impact of your actions. And so like, have that conversation with staff who, especially, I know so many venues have staff that have been there for decades at this point, right? They've worked the bar for like 5-10 years. So like, ask them what was going well and what wasn't, and hear them, like listen to them when they raise concerns. I think that's one really great place to start, and to start like breaking down some of the major barriers to progress happening, which is like, staff doesn't feel safe. They don't feel like they have a place to go with this. They don't have someone who they can trust, who they can talk to about it. So like, start there. And then, educate yourself, and whether you're in a position of management, booking shows, running the bar, just bartending, whatever, educate yourself on all of the, so much amazing content has come out in the last year, especially following the murder of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd. Content about, how to combat racism in the workplace, how to combat structural oppression in the workplace. Like, so much brilliance is on the internet for free. I can say Our Music My Body has a link on our Instagram to a non-exhaustive, but like a good list. It's like a Google Doc of where to start, like articles to read, books to read, to start educating yourself on how you can break down some of this stuff. So take this time that we have, like, while we're still waiting for things to happen, waiting for places to open, while we're maybe starting to look at and restructure our policies and the way we do things too. Take this time to really absorb as much as you can about what workers need and what they're asking for. And then, once you get to a point where you're feeling like, I have a lot of ideas, I have changes I want to make, maybe you're feeling like, I just really need that extra boost so that the owners will listen to me, or so that the rest of my team will get on board with me. I'd be like, that's a good spot to start to collaborate with, whatever group has sprung up in your city, similar to OMB, similar to Hollaback, similar to Good Night Out, that's looking to end harm against folks in these spaces and also for folks working in these spaces. Partner with them at that point and ask them, okay, here's all the things we did do or we want to do. What are we missing? How can we make this even better? And ultimately know that you're going to have to be flexible too. Like, you're not going to get it right overnight. It's not going to be, you're not going to open your doors and suddenly everything's fixed and changed, because unfortunately we live in a culture that still perpetuates harm. Like, that's just inevitable. You can't get away from that. But don't use that as an excuse to just like throw in the towel, right? To just accept that harm is going to happen. But stay flexible, stay curious about how you can do better. And like, look at who's running your space, and is it representing the kind of people who you want in your space? Those are changes you can make. Things like that, I think, are a good place to start. And as I was saying before, in terms of like festivals making policies and stuff, like, acknowledge, like, step one, acknowledge that you're going to mess up and be upfront about it, be forthcoming with that information. I think that a lot of the reactions, especially when we see like this like dogpile style call outs online and stuff, a lot of that is just going to be like fueled by people not knowing, like, wanting more answers than they're getting, not knowing what steps are being taken, not knowing if the venue itself is listening to their concerns. So like, be honest, be transparent about the changes you're making. People want to hear about that. I mean, I can also point to our survey that OMB did a couple years ago. Like, almost 100% of the 500 people who took our survey said they would be more likely to go to a venue that has undergone like an OMB training. Almost 100%. So, and that's simple stuff you can do, like, and that's going to get more people in the door.
Yeah. Right. So I've got two more questions for you. Because I'll need to get going. And I hope the first one I hope is a quick one, but it doesn't have to be, because I really like hearing you talk.
Thanks.
How can someone go about starting an OMMB chapter in their own community?
So this is a question that comes up so often. I should have a better answer by now. The short answer is link up with your local anti-violence agencies. They have the expertise and the experience to really know where to start in terms of like creating prevention programs in a community, providing resources for survivors in a community, that kind of thing. So I would say, figure out what rape crisis centers, what domestic violence centers exist in your space, in your community. You can even reach out to OMB. Honestly, I get those call outs sometimes, and I'm always happy to answer and just say, yo, I live in, small town Missouri, and I don't even know where to start. Like, I'll help you figure it out, because that's what I do. But yeah, find those people, partner with those people, leverage whatever sort of power or privilege you have in your scene to make resources available, to make those connections too. And I think that, while I feel like the work that I get to do with OMB is very special, and I do, any prevention educator, sexual violence prevention educator, has experience doing specialized training for, specific communities on prevention. And so like, that's a place to start. If you work at a venue or you have connections to a festival, set up a training, call them up and set something up. And again, if this feels very overwhelming, you can absolutely reach out to me, and I'm happy to help. But in terms of like a fish, like starting a chapter in your city, we aren't there yet. I want to be. We've gone to festivals. We've gone to Firefly Festival in Dover, Delaware, a couple of years now, and they've been really amazing to us, and accommodating and welcoming and wonderful. We've gotten asked to do Fest in California, and we've done some of them, and like, I'm not gonna lie, it's very groovy to get to like go work in all these different places, but it's not sustainable. Like, we're like just a few people. And also acknowledging like, y'all know your community better than I ever will. So, like, absolutely call on orgs like Our Music My Body for help, but like, just dive in. I don't know. Maybe that's like a cop out answer. I'm sorry. Hopefully that's helpful.
It's a good answer. It's an honest answer. Like, which is, yeah, I'd rather an honest answer than you'd make than a lie. So, um, okay. So I open and close with the same questions. So if you did your homework, you should be prepared. But uh, so going back to your original like uh, Genesis story, um, if you could reach out or have a conversation with uh, Maggie in Bloomington, going to these broy shows and just feeling uncomfortable, um, what would you say to her about what you became?
I've been like, I heard you ask that question, and I still feel like it's such a big question. I don't feel adequately prepared for it. I think that I would tell her to keep taking up space and to keep enjoying the things that she enjoys with, with reckless abandon. I think especially when you're trying to participate in a community where you don't feel immediately welcomed in, it can feel like you have to make yourself smaller or cover up some of the stuff that you're genuinely enthusiastic about if it's not cool. And so I would say that, yeah, I would say like, keep taking up space and keep just enjoying all of the nerdy stuff that you like. And, don't let people feel like you don't belong because you're like not cool.
That's a pretty good answer. Um, Thank you so much for joining us. So now you're ourmusicmybody.org, is that right?
Yep.
All right. So if anyone wants
That's
to,
right.
there's tons of good resources there. Um, yeah. Thank you. This this one's made. This is one of these that I've wanted to do from the beginning, and I'm really happy that you came on and were willing to talk to me and talk about this. Uh, there's nothing more important to me than people going out and enjoying live events and feeling comfortable there. And the work you're doing is incredible. And yeah, although now I'm kind of fired up and want to start a chapter out here, even though you said that isn't a thing that you do, but now that's like, yeah. I'm,
You can like rebrand it.
Thank you so much. This has been a pleasure, and will go down as possibly the most informative one of these yet.
That's exciting. Thank you. I will also take nerdiest, but like, I'm fine with it. I appreciate you putting a spin on it.
Yeah, I mean, nerdy, there's some competition for, but
Fair enough. Fair enough.
thank Maggie Arthur for coming and chatting with me. Well, coming to Zoom and chatting with me. Yeah, just ourmusicmybody.org is where you can go to get involved with Our Music My Body and learn how to get this if blah